Pack a tin, butter the bread, and find a patch of grass, because the British picnic was never about luxury. It was about feeding a hungry family on next to nothing, then calling it a treat. We are counting down 25 secret British picnic meals that fed whole families for pennies. Dishes carried in battered baskets across commons, cliff tops, and seaside promenades alike. From sandwiches stretched with sugar to pies that traveled for miles without spoiling. Each one tells a story of thrift, invention, and stolen summer joy. Some will turn your stomach. Others will flood you with memory. Which clever, frugal favorite tops our list? Spread the blanket, and let's begin the countdown with number 25. Number 25. Cucumber sandwiches arrived at the picnic with airs far above their station, a posh-sounding triangle made from almost nothing at all. Housewives peeled a single cucumber, sliced it paper-thin, salted the slices in a colander, then pressed the water out between two plates weighted with a tin of peas. The trick was dryness. A wet cucumber turned bread to paste before the family even reached the park gates. By the early 1950s, a cucumber cost barely 2p at the greengrocer, stretching to feed a whole carabanc outing. Children mocked them as rabbit food, yet the cool crunch against soft buttered bread tasted like summer itself. Oral histories recall the careful peeling, the salt, and the quiet satisfaction of serving something that looked grand for the price of a postage stamp. The cucumber sandwich was thrift dressed up in its Sunday best. Number 24. Beetroot sandwiches stained fingers and tablecloths a violent purple, a sweet, earthy filling that cost next to nothing from the allotment. Housewives boiled beetroots until tender, sliced them, then steeped them in malt vinegar in a jam jar that lived at the back of the larder for weeks. By 1953, beetroot was among the cheapest crops a family could grow, and a single jar could fill a whole basket of sandwiches. The danger was the bleed. The crimson juice soaked through bread the moment it touched. So clever, mothers buttered both slices thickly to build a barrier. Children opened their sandwiches at the picnic to find the bread, tie-dyed pink, half horrified and half delighted. Diaries from the era recall the vinegar tang, the purple lips, and the way a humble root from the garden became a treat carried out into the sunshine. Number 23. Sugar sandwiches stood as the starkest reminder of just how little a family had to work with. White bread, a scrape of margarine, and a spoonful of sugar pressed flat with the back of a knife. That was the whole recipe. By the early 1950s, with rationing still biting and sweets a rare luxury, a sugar sandwich was the cheapest pudding a mother could conjure, costing little more than the bread itself. The sugar crunched between the teeth, dissolving into the soft crumb, and to a child who had known nothing sweeter, it tasted like pure indulgence. Oral histories speak plainly of these sandwiches as the treat of the truly hard-up, handed out at the seaside when nothing else could be spared. For many, the memory carries both shame and tenderness, proof that even sugar and bread could feel like a feast. Number 22. Banana sandwiches marked a small step up in the world, a sign that the worst of the shortages had passed, and exotic fruit had crept back onto the greengrocer's stall. Housewives mashed a single ripe banana with a fork, sometimes mixed with a little sugar or condensed milk to stretch it further, then spread it thick across buttered bread. By the mid-1950s, bananas had returned after wartime absence, and one fruit could fill enough sandwiches for 3 children. The filling browned quickly, so mothers made them at the last moment or doused the mash with a squeeze of lemon. Children adored them, the soft, sweet paste a world away from the plainness of bread and marg. Oral histories recall the novelty of the banana, the careful sharing of a single fruit, and the joy it brought to a basket bound for the beach. Number 21. Bread and dripping went to the picnic too, though it never lost the shadow of hard times that clung to it. Housewives saved every drop of fat from the Sunday joint, cooling it in a basin until it set firm and golden, the jelly at the bottom prized above all. Spread thick on bread with a pinch of salt, it carried the memory of roast beef long after the meat was gone. By the early 1950s, with a loaf costing just 11p, dripping bread was the cheapest filling food a basket could hold. Children ate it on the common without complaint, the salty richness sinking into the crumb. Diaries from mining towns recall fathers tucking into dripping doorsteps after a long walk, grateful for the taste of last Sunday's dinner. It was a picnic born of pure necessity, plain and unashamed. Number 20. Jam sandwiches were the undisputed workhorse of the British picnic, the filling that turned up in nearly every basket on every common in the land. Housewives spread homemade jam, often plum or blackberry gathered free from the hedgerows, across soft white bread cut into thick, generous slices. By 1955, the National Food Survey showed jam and preserves in almost every household weekly, the cheapest way to make bread feel like a treat. The danger was sogginess. By the time the family reached the park, the jam had often soaked clean through, so wise mothers buttered the bread first to hold the line. Children peeled the sticky halves apart and licked the jam from their fingers. Oral histories recall the purple-stained paper, the wasps it drew, and the simple, reliable sweetness that made a jam sandwich the very taste of a summer afternoon. Number 19. Fish paste sandwiches carried a salty, pungent tang that divided the picnic blanket clean down the middle. Housewives bought small glass pots of bloater or salmon paste for a few pence, scraping the strong-smelling spread thinly across buttered bread to make it last. By the late 1950s, fish paste was a larder staple in nearly every working-class home, a cheap way to add the flavor of fish to a meal without the cost of the real thing. The smell was unmistakable, drifting from the basket the moment the lid came off. Children either loved the savory punch or pulled faces and traded them away. Oral histories recall the little pots lined up in the pantry, the careful scraping to stretch one jar across a week, and the way fish paste became shorthand for a picnic done on a tight, careful budget. Number 18. Cheese and onion sandwiches packed a punch that could clear a whole row of deck chairs. Housewives grated a knob of cheddar, mixed it with finely chopped raw onion and a smear of margarine, then pressed it between thick slices of bread. By 1954, cheese was off the ration at last, and the sharp tang of a cheese and onion round became a picnic favorite that filled bellies cheaply. The raw onion was the key. It added bite and bulk, stretching a small piece of cheese across far more sandwiches than it had any right to fill. Children breathed onion fumes over one another all afternoon, much to their parents' despair. Oral histories recall the strength of the onion, the way the smell lingered in the basket, and the deep, savory satisfaction of a sandwich that asked for so little yet delivered so much flavor. Number 17. Hard-boiled eggs were the picnic in its purest, most portable form, a self-contained meal that needed nothing but a twist of salt in a screw of paper. Housewives boiled a panful the night before, cooling them under the tap and packing them whole in their shells to keep them clean. By the early 1950s, with eggs still carefully counted, a couple of boiled eggs made a cheap and filling addition to any basket. The ritual was the peeling, done on the spot, shells flicked into the grass, while the family dug for the little paper twist of salt. Children mashed theirs into bread to make egg sandwiches there and then. Oral histories recall the slightly green-rimmed yolks, the sulphurous smell on a warm day, and the dependable, fuss-free nourishment of an egg that needed no plate, no knife, and no fuss. Number 16. Cold sausages were the leftover that became a treat, the surplus from Saturday's tea traveling out to Sunday's picnic. Housewives cooked an extra pan full of bangers deliberately, knowing the cold ones would vanish the next day on the common. By the early 1950s, sausages were among the cheapest meat a family could buy, padded out with rusk and bread to make them stretch. Eaten cold from the fingers, the firm, peppery links needed no reheating and no cutlery, the perfect basket food. Children dipped them in a little screw of mustard or simply gnawed them as they ran. Oral histories recall the snap of the skin, the cold, dense filling, and the quiet pleasure of meat at a picnic when meat was still a thing to be savored. A cold sausage was thrift turned into a small, portable feast. Number 15. Spam sandwiches traveled out of the wartime larder and straight onto the picnic blanket, the pink tinned loaf that had fed Britain through its leanest years. Housewives sliced the meat thin, sometimes frying it first for sandwiches eaten cold, layering it with a smear of mustard or pickle between buttered bread. By the early 1950s, Spam remained a cupboard insurance policy in millions of homes, a cheap and lasting source of meat that needed no fridge. The salty, dense slices held up well in a warm basket where fresh meat would have spoiled. Children either relished the savory saltiness or eyed the strange pink rectangle with suspicion. Oral histories recall the ring of the tin opener, the jellied coating wiped away, and the way Spam became both a joke and a comfort, the taste of make-do that families carried with them into the sunshine. Number 14. Tongue sandwiches brought a touch of butcher's counter ceremony to the humble picnic. Housewives bought pressed ox tongue by the slice, or boiled and peeled a whole one at home, laying the tender pink meat between buttered bread with a dab of mustard. By the mid-1950s, tongue was still cheaper than a proper joint, a thrifty way to bring real meat to the blanket and look generous doing it. The flavor was rich and beefy, the texture smooth, a world away from the plain sandwiches that surrounded it. Children eyed the slices warily once told what they were, while adults ate with relish. Oral histories recall the long boiling, the strange task of peeling the skin, and the quiet pride of a mother who could serve cold tongue at a picnic and make a few cheap shillings look like a small extravagance. Number 13. Tinned salmon sandwiches were the picnic's flash of glamour, the filling reserved for high days, bank holidays, and trips to the seaside. Housewives opened a precious tin of pink salmon, mashed it with vinegar and a crack of pepper, picking out the soft bones and skin, then spread it thick across the best bread in the house. By 1955, a tin of salmon was a small luxury, kept at the back of the cupboard for occasions that mattered. The picnic was exactly such an occasion. The rich, oily fish tasted of celebration, a step above the everyday paste and dripping. Children knew that salmon meant the day was special. Oral histories recall the careful opening of the tin, the vinegar sharpness, and the sense of treat that came with every bite, proof that even on a budget, a family could taste a little luxury. Number 12. Pickled eggs traveled in their own jar, a wobbling, vinegar-soaked oddity that drew gasps and dares in equal measure. Housewives boiled eggs hard, peeled them, then drowned them in spiced malt vinegar for weeks until the whites turned rubbery and sharp. By the early 1950s, a jar of pickled eggs sat in many a pantry and on many a pub counter, a cheap and long-lasting snack that kept without a fridge. Fished out at the picnic, they were eaten whole or quartered, the pungent vinegar bite making children's eyes water. Oral histories recall the cloudy jar, the sharp tang that caught the back of the throat, and the contest among children to eat one without pulling a face. The pickled egg was thrift at its most stubborn, a single egg made to last and travel, defiant in its sour glory. Number 11. Rock cakes rattled out of the baking tin and into the picnic basket, rough little buns that survived any journey without crumbling to dust. Housewives rubbed margarine into flour, scattered in a handful of dried fruit and sugar, then dropped craggy spoonfuls onto a tray and baked them hard. By the early 1950s, rock cakes were the cheapest baking a mother could manage, using little fat and stretching a few currants a very long way. Their sturdy, knobbly shape was their secret. They could be bounced in a basket all the way to the coast and arrive intact. Children gnawed them happily, dunking them in cups of tea poured from the flask. Oral histories recall the firm crumb, the sparse scattering of fruit, and the way a rock cake's very toughness made it the ideal traveling treat for a frugal family day out. Number 10. Welsh cakes sizzled on a heavy bakestone. Flat, little griddle cakes, spiced and studded with currants that filled the kitchen with sweet steam. Housewives mixed flour, lard, sugar and dried fruit, rolled the dough thin, cut it into rounds, and cooked them dry on the iron until speckled brown. By the early 1950s, Welsh cakes were a staple of valley kitchens, cheap to make and quick to cook without an oven. Dusted with sugar and packed warm into a tin, they travelled beautifully to the hillside or the chapel outing. Children fought over the ones with the most currants. Oral histories from the mining valleys recall the hiss of the bakestone, the warm, spiced smell, and the pride in a batch made for a family trip. The Welsh cake was thrift turned to comfort, a sweet little round that carried home in every bite. Number 9. Butterfly buns fluttered out of the baking tin as the picnic's prettiest offering, small sponge cakes given wings from their own sliced-off tops. Housewives baked a tray of plain fairy cakes, cut a cone from the top of each, filled the hollow with a little buttercream or jam, then set the halved cone back on as wings. By the mid-1950s, these dainty buns were a fixture at children's parties and Sunday outings, made from the cheapest sponge mixture a kitchen could muster. The clever cut turned a plain bun into something that looked like a treat from a proper bakery. Children adored them, picking at the wings first. Oral histories recall the careful slicing, the dab of cream, and the delight on small faces at the sight of a butterfly bun, proof that a little imagination could turn pennies into something magical. Number 8. Flapjacks were the picnic's sturdy workhorse, dense golden slabs of oats and syrup that fueled a family through the longest of country walks. Housewives melted margarine with sugar and a generous pour of golden syrup, stirred in rolled oats, then pressed the mixture into a tin and baked it firm before cutting it into bars. By the early 1950s, oats were among the cheapest staples in any larder, and a tin of flapjacks fed a whole rambling party for a few pence. The chewy, sticky bars kept for days and survived any rucksack without harm. Children loved the sweet, syrupy crunch. Oral histories recall the smell of warm syrup, the satisfying chew, and the way a flapjack delivered solid energy for a hike across the hills. It was the perfect frugal fuel, sweet, filling, and stubbornly indestructible in a battered tin. Number 7. Jam tarts gleamed up from the baking tray like little stained glass windows, pastry cases brimming with bubbling, jewel-bright preserve. Housewives rolled out the trimmings from a larger pie, cut rounds to line a bun tray, then dropped a teaspoon of jam into each before baking until the pastry crisped and the jam set glossy. By the early 1950s, jam tarts were the thriftiest of bakes, born from leftover scraps of pastry that would otherwise have gone to waste. Different jams gave different colors, and children learned which window was strawberry and which was green gauge. The danger was the molten filling, hot enough to scald an impatient tongue. Oral histories recall the rainbow of colors, the burnt fingers, and the joy of a tray of tarts made from nothing but odds and ends. The jam tart was waste not baking at its prettiest. Number 6. Lardy cake oozed its way into the picnic basket, a heavy, glistening slab of dough enriched with lard, sugar, and dried fruit until it nearly dripped. Housewives took spare bread dough, rolled lard and sugar through it in layer after layer, then baked it until the bottom caramelized into a sticky, sweet pool. By the early 1950s, lardy cake was a regional treasure of the southern counties, a way to turn cheap dough and rendered fat into something rich enough for a Sunday treat. The cake traveled wrapped in greaseproof, leaking sweetness through the paper by the time the family arrived. Children licked the sticky glaze from their fingers. Oral histories recall the heaviness in the hand, the caramelized base, and the guilty pleasure of a cake so rich it felt sinful, all conjured from the humblest scraps of fat and flour. Number 5. Bread pudding squares sat in the basket like dense, dark bricks, the ultimate proof that a thrifty British kitchen wasted nothing at all. Housewives soaked stale bread in water or milk, squeezed it dry, then mixed in dried fruit, sugar, spice, and a little fat before baking the lot into a heavy slab and cutting it into squares. By the early 1950s, bread pudding was a Saturday ritual in countless homes, the answer to a week's worth of leftover crusts. Cold and firm, it carried beautifully to the seaside and filled the hungriest child. The spiced, fruity slab was sweet without being delicate, satisfying without being costly. Oral histories recall the weight of it, the way a single square sat heavy in the stomach for hours, and the pride in a pudding made entirely from bread that would otherwise have gone to the birds. Number 4. Scotch eggs rolled into the basket as the picnic's small marvel, a whole hard-boiled egg wrapped in sausage meat, breaded and fried until deep golden brown. Housewives boiled eggs, cooled them, encased each in a layer of seasoned sausage, then coated them in breadcrumbs before frying them crisp. By the early 1950s, the Scotch egg was a clever way to stretch both egg and sausage into a portable meal that needed no plate. Eaten cold and cut clean in two, it revealed the bright yolk at its center, a small picnic ceremony all of its own. Children marveled at the layers. Oral histories recall the crunch of the coating, the surprise of the egg within, and the satisfaction of a single self-contained meal that combined protein, meat and crumb into one neat handheld parcel made for the open air. Number 3. Sausage rolls came out of the oven by the dozen, flaky little pastry parcels that no British picnic was ever truly complete without. Housewives rolled out pastry, laid a long sausage of seasoned meat down the middle, folded and sealed it, then cut the log into lengths and baked them golden. By the early 1950s, the sausage roll was the cornerstone of every street party, chapel outing and family day at the coast, a way to stretch cheap sausage meat with even cheaper pastry. Eaten warm or cold, the flaky shell and savory filling pleased every member of the family. Children counted them jealously to make sure the sharing was fair. Oral histories recall the shower of pastry flakes, the peppery meat, and the way a tin of sausage rolls vanished in minutes. It was the most beloved savory bake the picnic ever knew. Number 2. Cornish pasties travelled out of the tin mines and across the whole country, the original self-contained meal built to survive any journey in a pocket or a basket. Housewives filled rounds of sturdy pastry with diced beef, potato, swede and onion, crimped the thick edge into a rope along the top, and baked them until deeply golden. By the early 1950s, the pasty was the working family's ideal portable dinner, a complete meal sealed inside its own pastry shell, no plate required. The crimped seam was a handle, once gripped by miners with dirty hands and discarded. Children clutched the warm parcels with both hands, steam escaping the first bite. Oral histories recall the peppery filling, the sturdy crust, and the genius of a meal designed to travel, the whole of a family's dinner baked into a single, satisfying parcel. And finally, in first place, the pork pie crowned the British picnic basket as the undisputed king of frugal portable food. Housewives, or more often the local butcher, packed seasoned minced pork into a stout case of hot watercrust pastry, baked it firm, then poured savory jelly through a hole in the top to seal the meat as it cooled. By the mid-1950s, the pork pie was the centerpiece of every grand picnic, a hand-raised marvel that needed no fridge and traveled for miles without spoiling. The thick, sturdy crust protected the rich pink meat within, while the jelly set everything firm and glistening. Children watched the pie cut into wedges with ceremony, each slice revealing the meat ringed by clear jelly. Oral histories recall the snap of the crust, the savory depth of the filling, and the sense of occasion a whole pork pie brought to the blanket. It was meat, pastry and jelly in one perfect parcel, the thriftiest grand gesture a family ever carried into the sunshine. The pork pie was proof that even on the tightest budget, a British picnic could feel like a banquet spread across the grass. From the humble sugar sandwich to the triumphant pork pie, these 25 picnic meals tell the same quiet story. A family making magic out of almost nothing and calling a patch of grass a celebration. Which one will you pack on your next day out? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten tastes of British life.